Okay, so hi guys. For this particular video, I'll just talk more about JavaScript. In particular, I'll talk about JavaScript syntax, literals, variables, how to create comments, how to declare variables, how to use assignment operators, data types, identifiers, arithmetic, and block scope. Some of these have already been discussed in the previous two other videos. And perhaps in some instances, you have also applied your understanding of the other programming languages. So I'm sure that learning JavaScript has not been really very difficult for you. So I would just emphasize here some of the similarities or differences, what makes JavaScript unique, so that we'll have a better understanding of these things in JavaScript. So the JavaScript syntax is just like any programming languages. We need to declare a variable, but when or how we declare variables may differ. So two of the options that you have in JavaScript in declaring a variable is using var and let. So later on we will discuss other things. So here we have var, num1, and let sum2. Okay, as what you will later understand, there are variations or differences between how or limitations between when you declare a variable as using var and when you declare a variable using let. So here you're simply declaring num1 and sum2. You are declaring num1 as var, you're declaring sum2 as let, or using let, and you're assigning two values to these two variables. You have 5 and 6, and you have declared another or third variable using let, and you declared a variable named sum to contain the value of your num1 and num2, and that's perfectly all right. So here the JavaScript syntax defines two types of values. That's either fixed values or variable values. So fixed values are called literals, and variable values are called variables. Okay, so when we talk of JavaScript literals, for instance, fixed values are called literals. So it could be either numbers or strings. So for now, just think about these two possible data types, but of course, there are many other data types in JavaScript. Now, so for numbers, these are written with or without decimals. For instance, you have 9.3 or 9,830. That's an example of a number. For strings, these are text, in other words, and these are written within double or single quotes. For example, here you have Silliman University enclosed in double quotes, or Silliman University enclosed in single quotes. Now, in programming language, variables are used to store data values, so that's also true in JavaScript. You use variables to store values. So JavaScript uses the words or the keywords var, let, and const to declare variables, and of course you already know that the equal sign is used to assign values to variables. So in here you have an example of a code wherein you declared inside your script code, you have declared num using the let way of declaring the variable, and then you assign 6 to num, and then here you simply displayed or assigned the value of num to your id sample. So in this case here, it will be displayed inside your p/p tags. So I think we are clear on this one, and we already understood this based on the previous exercises and discussions that we already had. Now, so how do you create comments in JavaScript? So you have different ways of creating comments based on the programming language, but in JavaScript, both your double slash and your slash asterisk slash are acceptable. So if it is in line, you can put or you can precede it with a double slash, or if it is a block, or even just in one line, you can enclose it with a slash asterisk slash options. Now, so we mentioned earlier var and let. There are two other ways of declaring variables in JavaScript, and that's using const and nothing. So let's first talk about var. So actually, if you look at the timeline in 1995 to 2015, you can only use or you can only declare a variable in JavaScript using var. But in 2015, they added let and const, so there were two other options to declare a variable. But please take note that it has limitations. So for example, if you want your code to be read or to be run, if you want your code to be read by older browsers, you have to use var, because older browsers do not understand let and const. So in this example here, you have var num1 and num2. So num1 is declared or is given a initial value of 24 using your assignment operator, and then num2 is given an initial value of 34, and you declare the third variable sum using the values that are already stored in num1 and num2. So that will add 24 and 34 and store it to sum. And so when you use your document that get element by ID, that inner HTML code to display the value using your ID sample, you assign here the value of sum is, and then the value of sum, which is now the total of 24 and 34, which is 58. So in this case here, given this particular script, the output that you will get is the value of sum is 58. I hope at this point I don't have to discuss or specifically say anymore that your ID here is sample. So that means to say that you should also use an ID here that is sample, so that whatever is the value inside your document that get element by ID, that inner HTML, it will be displayed on that particular HTML tag, which is identified as sample. So it will be placed in between p/p tags. So that's our first example. Now let's move on to how to declare a variable using let. So as mentioned already, let and const has only been available in the later versions of your browser. So you have to take caution in using let. So in let, you have here an example, let num1 is equal to 7. So basically, you're just replacing the word var with let, and you have declared a variable called num1 with an initial value of 7, and another variable num2 with an initial value of 2. So when you multiply them and store it to the third variable product, and you display it using, again, the same code, document that get element by ID, and then sample is the name of your ID. So that will be replaced. That will replace the value here in your p/p code. That inner HTML. So that means that this placeholder p will display the value of product is, and then the value of your variable product, which is the result of multiplying num1 times num2. So that will display 14. So the value of product is 14. That will be displayed in between your p/p code, and that is because of assigning this particular ID with the value of product is, and then take note of the plus sign, because you could add your string, the value of product, and the value of product into one value. So that's why you display the value of product is 14 if you're going to run this code. Now, what will happen to undeclared variables? Now, actually, it will still run in JavaScript even though you don't use var or let to declare a variable. So for instance, here you have num1 is equal to 50 and num2 is equal to 6. When you declare the third variable diff without even specifying var or let, that is still allowed in JavaScript, although you might have problems in the future. So you have here num1 minus num2, that means 50 minus 60. That will be the value of your diff, which is 44. So when you say the value of diff is 44, okay, please take note that what will be displayed in the place of your p/p tag here. Alright, so this is what happens when you use a variable that is undeclared. So just do this with caution, and I would not recommend this during our exams. You have to explicitly define a variable so that you won't have problems with your code later on. Now, the third way to declare a JavaScript variable is using const. So in this case, please take note that you only use const if you don't have any plan of changing its value. So as you can see, you have const item 1 price is equal to 5.5 and const item 2 price is equal to 6.25. So this means that you don't have any plans of changing the value of item 1 price and item 2 price because these are constant variables. So that means all throughout your page or all throughout your or your HTML file, it will be always 5.5 and 6.25 respectively for item 1 price and item 2 price. Now in this case here, the third variable is declared using let. So that means you can still change later on the value of your variable total if you need to change them because these are not constant declarations. So the output of this code is going to be the total is and then the sum of 5.5 and 6.25, which is 11.75. So I'm sorry, the total is 11.75. Now, so just like any programming language, you have the equal sign as your assignment operator. So I think you already know how to use this. The left side should be the variable where you want the value at the right side to be stored. Okay, so just take note of these things when identifying data types. In JavaScript, variables can store text values like Silliman University, numbers like 50, and fractions like 11.45. So text values are referred to as strings or text strings in programming, and you just think of strings and numbers for now, but these are not, as mentioned already in the previous slide, these are not the only data types that are available in JavaScript. So JavaScript can also handle other programming languages. So numbers can be written without quotes, but strings are typed using double or single quotes. So please take note that just like in Excel, for instance, if you enclose a number within quotations, it is treated as a text string, and so therefore you cannot perform mathematical excuse me, you cannot perform mathematical operations with it. So when you say JavaScript identifiers, these are like your variable names, and so all JavaScript variables must be identified with unique names. So unique names are called identifiers, and they can be as short as A, B, C, or X and Y, or more descriptive like your product, sum, temp, or total sales. So this is the general rule for the naming convention as far as JavaScript identifier is concerned. So it may contain letters, digits, underscores, or dollar signs. Names must begin with a letter. It can also begin with a dollar sign and an underscore. So again, it may start with a letter, a dollar sign, or an underscore. It is also case sensitive. So in other words, if you have declared a variable small letter x and declared another variable capital X, these are two different variables, such as if you use total sales with capital S and total sales with capital T and S. Or for instance, if you have another declaration, total sales, which are using all small letters. So again, as mentioned in the previous video, you cannot use reserved words as your variable names or identifiers because they already have other specific meaning for JavaScript. And this is true for other programming language as well. Now, so please take note, in JavaScript, you can declare many variables in one statement. So for instance, you can say let school is equal to Silliman U. Now, so far, we have only declared one variable at a time and ended it with a semicolon. In this case, if you have more than one variable to declare in one statement, you just separate them with a comma. So you have let school is equal to Silliman U, stud name is equal to Juan Cruz, fee is equal to 5,000. So you have just declared three variables in one statement, and that's school, stud name, and fee. So in this case here, you're only assigning the value of stud name to your ID sample. So only Juan Cruz will be displayed inside your p/p tags. Now, it may also span multiple lines. If you want to use only one let for declaring these three variables, but You don't want to put all of them in one line. You want to, so for easy reading and understanding, you want to separate them into or put them in different lines or multiple lines. You can just end one sentence with a comma, but that's not yet the end of your statement. Another declaration stood name, for instance, and put the comma and then your fee, and this is now the end of your statement, and so therefore you need to put the semicolon at the end. So that's also allowed in JavaScript. Now, undefined variables. So variables are also frequently declared in computer programs without a value. So if in case, for instance, you have just declared a variable using let or using var, and you don't assign it any value, and yet you assign it to a particular ID. In this case, sample, the output is going to be undefined because you did not assign any value to your variable fee or tuition fee before assigning it to your ID sample. So try to run this code and you will see that the output that you will find is undefined. Now, let's move on to JavaScript identifiers. So a JavaScript variable declared with a var keyword will retain its value if you redeclare it. So following the execution of the following commands, the variable stood name will still contain who1. So as you can see here, in var, for instance, when you declare a variable using var and it's exactly the same variable name, that's actually allowed if you're using var to declare and redeclare it. Now in this case here, because you have initially already declared stood name and assigned it a value of 1, if you, for instance, declared it again, okay, and kindly ignore the letter E on the second declaration. So assume that both of these are two exactly the same names, and I might would not edit that now, but just assume that these are both the same spellings. So in other words, you have declared stood name and assigned it a value of who1, and then you re-declared it again. So using exactly the same name, stood name without an E. Now, so that is allowed in JavaScript, and what will happen is that in this case, it will still display the value of who1 on your placeholder paragraph. Okay, so it doesn't mean, because there are other programming languages wherein if you declared it initially and so it will become an undefined variable. But in this case here, because these are two different names, again, please take note of that, then the output will still be who1. Okay, so let me just emphasize this, and I'll just put this is to name also. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Now, so for arithmetic, you can perform mathematical or arithmetic values using operators like equal sign and plus, just like in algebra. So I guess you already understand this. In this case, you're assigning, you have just declared variable x and assign it with a value of 50 plus 80 plus 80, and that will be 138. And so if, for instance, because of course 80 plus 50 and 80 here are all numbers, so that will be added with no problem. Now if you're going to use the plus sign with text, what will happen? So in this case here, it will be Silliman. So you have declared a variable named name, and then you assign it with the value of Silliman, and you use the plus sign to add a space and another plus sign to add university. And so in that case, the value of your variable name is going to be Silliman space university. So I guess you already know this based on our previous discussions, but again, as I said, I just want to emphasize this, that using the plus sign means, for text, it means that you will be appending this text at the end. Okay, so when you combine strings and numbers, so for instance, you have declared a variable a and you assign it with a string, okay, because it is enclosed in double quotes, it's a string, and then you added 2 and 0. So what will happen here is that you're going to, since you have already started the assignment of this variable with a string, the rest of the numbers or the rest of the values that follows it will also be considered as a string. And so when you do this and you assign the value of a to your ID sample, the output is going to be 620. And yes, it's not going to add 2 and 0 and add it to your string, which is 6. So the output is going to be 620 because it will treat 2 and 0 as a string as well. Now it's different. It's different if you're going to start with a number, as what you will see later on. Now let me give you another example. You have here 6 and then 2 and then 0 and then 0. Now strictly speaking, 6 here is a string, 2 and 0s are numbers, 0 here, the last 0 is a string, but the output that you will get, or that will be derived from this statement, is going to be 6200. So all of them will be treated as a text. Now, when you combine numbers and strings, that's another different thing. So since the first value here is a 2, so a will be assigned to a as a number, and then you added 0, so 2 plus 0 is still 2, and then you added a string, which is the word line, and so that's why the output is only 2 line, not 2 0 and line, because initially it's treated as a number. Now, so in other words, if you have here let y is equal to 8 plus 0 plus 8, since the first two values are numbers, again it will add 8 plus 0 and you will get 0, and then add the string, which is 8. So that's why the output here is going to be 88. Okay, so I hope you will experiment on this one with different values and see how it will affect your output. Now let's go back to your JavaScript let. So your JavaScript, as mentioned, was only introduced in your Explorer in 2015. Now please take note that if you declare a variable with using let, it cannot be redeclared. So unlike the example earlier wherein you were using var and then you declared it again using var, exactly the same variable name, that was allowed, but using let, that is not allowed. So variable defined with let must be declared before use, and you have to please, you have to take note about the black scope, which I will also be discussing later on. So here you have a student declared using let, and you assign it a value of John Doe. If you're going to attempt declaring another variable with the same name and assign it a value of 27, it's going to be an error because student has already been declared previously with an initial value of John Doe. Now if you remember in our previous example earlier, we used var to declare a student name, and then we declared it again. It did not have any error, and in fact it was able to retain the initial value of the variable. But if you're going to do that using let, that is not going to be allowed. So again, if you're going to use var, in this case here you have student is equal to John Doe, then the John Doe, which is a text, will be assigned to student. But if you attempt to declare another variable with the same name in the same program, then it will not be allowed. So the second variable name is not going to be allowed if you're using let, but if you're using var, this is going to be allowed. Now let's move on to black scope. So black scope is actually not unique to JavaScript, but I might have to emphasize it here given that it may be that your experience in programming or other programming languages does not allow this. So JavaScript only has a global scope and function scope prior to ES, or your version 2015. So let and const are two crucial new JavaScript keywords that were added, and it is provided by these two keywords. It's declared within your open and close curly braces. So a block's defined variables cannot be accessed from outside of it. So if you're going to put a block. Okay, now by putting a curly brace with for your declaration of num1, in this case num1 is only existing within that particular block. So that's the scope of the block, or that's the scope of your variable. So if you're going to use num1 or try to access num1 outside of this open and close curly braces, you cannot access num1 anymore. So outside of that scope, you cannot access num1. Now, however, this is using let. Now, if you're going to use var in declaring num1, it is available, or it can be used anywhere. So it has a global scope. So in this case, you're assigning 7 to num1. Now, you might assume that just like let, you can no longer access it outside of your scope, outside of your curly braces. But in this case here, because you're using var in declaring num1, num1 can still be used outside of that scope. Okay, now in redeclaring variables, I have also discussed this already. So using the var keyword to redefine a variable might cause issues. But when a variable is redefined inside a block, the variable is likewise redefined outside the block. So in this case, for instance, you have num1 is equal to 78. So within that space, the variable num1 is existing and its value is 78. Now you have a block of code, and inside that block scope, you declared num1 with a value of 67. And so within that block of code, the value of num1 is 67. When you get out of that scope, num1 is still going to be 67. So in other programming languages, doing this is like having a global variable. Okay, so but just take note that if you're going to use var, you might have problems. All right, so to be safe, you can use let. However, this is how let works. Now, when you declare a variable num1 using let and you give it a value of 89, within that range, or within that particular environment, the value of num1 is 89. Now you have a block of code enclosed in curly braces, and the value of num1 is 65. So within that block of code, within that open and closed curly braces, the value of num1 is 65. Now when the flow of your program gets out of that curly braces, the value of num1, this is not mum1 but num1, the value of within that curly braces or outside that block scope, the value of num1 resumes back to its original value, which is 89, because 65, or this particular num1, is only existing within this open and curly braces. So that's the beauty of let. So you might not have problems anymore tracing what's the value of the particular variable as it moves from your as the program flow goes from one line to the next. Now, so anywhere in the program, redeclaring a variable, a JavaScript variable with var is permitted. So here you have num1 is 29. So again, num1 has a value of 29. You redeclare it using var, and num1 will be acceptable and will be given a value of 45. So now the value of num1 is 45. Now this one, you have a declared value of num1 which is 34. Now you cannot use num1 anymore using let, okay, because again, using let and declaring the same variable name is not allowed. Now within your scope, here you have num1 and given it a value of 35. That's allowed now, okay, because remember that this num1 only exists in that particular scope, and this one is like a different block of code. Now you use let again to declare num1, and that is not allowed because using or redeclaring a variable using let is not allowed. Now in this case here, let is equal to num1 is 34. That's allowed again because you are in another scope of code or another block of code, and using var to declare num1 is therefore not allowed anymore because you already have declared num1 using let. Okay, so it's permitted to redefine a variable with let in another block. So that's the difference. So you have here num1 is equal to 8, that's allowed. If you have another block of code using let, that's also allowed because this is another block of code. So it's already outside of the scope of this first num1 that you have declared earlier. And this one is also the third num1 that you have declared, but again you also specify that this is another block of code. So therefore these three declarations are all allowed. Okay, so using let before it is declared, you can utilize the variable. So the thing is, if you're going to use a variable even before declaring it, that's also allowed using the var declaration. Okay, so for instance, as you can see here, we have already assigned a value to studname and we have not actually declared it yet. Okay, so I guess you have already figured this one out. It's the same as in your other programming languages. The addition, subtraction, multiplication, exponentiation, division, modulus, your increment and decrement are the same as in your other programming languages. Now, so you already understand this. For instance, given all those arithmetic operators that I discussed in the previous slide, so you have let a is equal to 5, and you have another variable res or result that will hold the value of a raised to the power of 2. And that's how you do it in JavaScript. Now, so this one is also something that may not be new anymore to you at this point. So if you're going to say x plus equals y, that's the same as saying x is equal to the current value of x plus y. And if you say x times equals y, that means the value of x times y, and then you replace the product of that one will be replacing the value of x. Alright, so with that, I hope that I was able to emphasize all of those things that might be bothering you, or so I don't want you to think that such differences or uniqueness or commonalities were not discussed in our class. So thank you so much for watching this video, and good luck in your future programming endeavors.